Hey, what's going on, guys? There has been a lot of discussion revolving around UFC 300 for literally the past 2 months, and I feel like a lot of it has been negative. And I've been negative about the card at times, but I've been defending UFC 300 for a while as well, and I have a bunch of videos on the channel you can go check out. But I wanted to make a video now that we have the majority of the card, even though we don't have the main event yet, which I'll give my guess on the main event at the end of this video. We have 11 of the fights confirmed for UFC 300, and we have a tentative bout order that's been released by the UFC. I figured I would make a video going through each one of these fights and discussing it in a positive manner, because there's been a few fights that I've been kind of down on and be like, yeah, I wish this was on a different card. But every single fight on this card is a very solid fight, especially considering the placement of some of these fights. So we're going to go in the tentative order that the UFC released recently in a graphic, and we're going to start off with Jessica Andrade versus Marina Rodriguez. Now, I've already made a dedicated video on a lot of these fights individually as they were released, and I feel like Jessica Andrade versus Marina Rodriguez got a lot of criticism and a lot of discussion about it, like kind of being crap for UFC 300. But this is looking like it's going to be the first fight of the night. That is crazy. Jessica Andrade, I know she's been showing up for a paycheck the last few fights, but she got to win against Mackenzie Dern. She's a power puncher. She's a finisher. She's a former champion. And Marina Rodriguez, relatively exciting on the feet as well. So, I mean, and also you look at both of them, they're ranked in their divisions, I believe currently in the top 5. You look at it right now, Marina Rodriguez is ranked number 6, and you have Jessica Andrade ranked number 4. That is very relevant to the women's strawweight division. It's a fan-friendly matchup in general. I know a lot of people hate women's MMA in general, and they kind of, blanket statement all of it. But overall, for the very first prelim, we're getting 2 fighters who are ranked in the top 6 of their division, and it's a fan-friendly matchup. It's a good fight. It's a solid fight for the very first prelim of UFC 300. Moving up on the card, next up, we have Sodiq Yusuff versus Diego Lopes. I mean, from the very jump, when we started kind of hypothetically thinking of what fights could be on the prelims of UFC 300, Diego Lopes was one of the first fighters that came to my mind. I mean, Diego Lopes looked incredible, on short notice against Movsar Evloev, who's arguably very close to a number 1 contender fight, or even being number 1 contender in the featherweight division, especially if Volkanovski beats Topuria. And now he's getting he's had 2 performances afterwards where he's gotten a win against Gavin Tucker and then most recently destroyed Pat Sabatini. And now he's getting a chance to enter that top 15 where he's not diving into the deep end against a guy like Movsar Evloev. And it's against Sodiq Yusuff, who's coming off one of the best fights of last year against Edson Barboza. That was an incredible matchup. I love this fight. Sodiq Yusuff, super well-rounded. Good test for Diego Lopes, who was super aggressive with unbelievable jiu-jitsu and submission attacks off his back from the top position. And I love this fight. I think this is a perfect prelim. And right now, the way the UFC has it, announced, and again, they're going to add a couple more fights. Right now, we have 11 fights announced. Typically, there's 12 to 14 fights per card, so we're at least due for the main event. And then we may get 1 or 2 more prelims after that, depending on how the card shakes out. But if this is the second fight of the night, this is an incredible matchup. I'm really looking forward to Sodiq Yusuff versus Diego Lopes. Diego Lopes is already a fan favorite, and Sodiq Yusuff ranked in the top 15. Right now, Sodiq Yusuff is number 12, so that gives Diego Lopes a good opportunity to jump in the top 15, and he's not going against a Movsar Evloev on short notice. Absolutely love this matchup. Moving up on the card, and probably my least favorite fight on the card, and that is Bo Nickal versus Cody Brundage, otherwise known as Cody Brundage. Now, I want to keep this video primarily positive, but I will say this isn't a very competitive matchup. I think this is an easy win for Bo Nickal, and I think what this is just kind of getting Bo Nickal a highlight reel KO or submission on one of the biggest cards of the year. That's what this is set up for. So ultimately, we're going to get that. What I've liked to see Bo Nickal get a little bit better step up in competition. I mean, look at Joe Pyfer fighting Jack Hermanson in a main event coming up shortly. But I guess Bo Nickal, limited experience in MMA. They want to kind of give him a slow road to become maybe a top 15 middleweight. So this is a matchup where you're almost guaranteed a highlight reel finish from Bo Nickal in the first round. And also, if Cody Brundage wins, maybe Batista bombs Bo Nickal somehow, that's the end of Bo Nickal's career as we know it, to be quite honest. So this is a fight that has a lot on the line, even though looking at the matchup, it's not super competitive. Moving up on the card, we have Bobby Green versus Jim Miller in the lightweight division. Jim Miller fought on UFC 100, fought on UFC 200. He's been adamant he wants to fight on UFC 300. And I think this is the perfect fight for him. I mean, him and Bobby Green, both veterans of the sport. You look at Bobby Green right now, it's crazy that Bobby Green is ranked because he knocked out Grant Dawson. Bobby Green's sitting at number 14. Jim Miller, I believe years and years ago, he was ranked in the lightweight division. I don't remember how long ago that was. But Jim Miller, in his late in his career, I mean, he may retire at 300. He gets an opportunity to jump into the top 15. Jim Miller's been sending back contender after contender after contender and Jim Miller's like an old farmhand that just won't go away at this point. And now he gets an opportunity against a Bobby Green who just got absolutely brutalized by Jalen Turner. I think this is great matchmaking of two veterans. They were supposed to fight multiple times throughout the years. And I think it's a fun fight. I mean, Jim Miller, very good striker, very good power. Bobby Green, always exciting to watch, has a weird funky style where he keeps his hands low. And this is a prelim. This is probably going to be on the early prelims, to be quite honest. I don't know. Again, we don't know the exact bout order, but this may very well be on the early prelims. So this is a good fight. This is a solid prelim, and I look forward to Jim Miller versus Bobby Green. Moving up on the card, this is another one that was very controversial, and that is Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison. This is a matchup that is very bizarre because it's taking place at 135 pounds, but it is very intriguing because if you think about it, Holly Holm's ranked in the top 10 of the bantamweight division. The bantamweight division I've been criticizing for a while. We need some fresh talent. We need some new blood. And the UFC's gone out and done exactly that. So they've signed Kayla Harrison. I don't know how she makes 135, but supposedly she's done multiple test cuts to get to 135. I know she had a loss against Pacheco, but, you know, it's one of those things where I don't think she was taking the competition very seriously, and maybe, you know, she kind of overlooked her, and that's how she ended up losing. Would I like to seen Harrison come in years ago and fight at 45 against Nunes? Yes, I would have. But her coming in against Holly Holm, potentially on the, it's going to be on the prelims. I just don't know whether prelims or early prelims. There was talk of maybe that headlining the prelims, which I don't think is the best bout order, but the division needs some new talent. How can we sit here, and I've complained about it. I know I've complained about it, but the UFC's doing what we've asked for. Sign some new talent for the women's bantamweight division. I mean, Raquel Pennington is your current champion. Juliana Pena is number one. If Kayla Harrison can make 135, which I don't know that she can, and this fight's going to get canceled if she can't. Holly Holm's already said basically she needs to make weight. But if Kayla Harrison can make 135, she's a champion. She's going to be champion. She beat Raquel Pennington. She would beat Juliana Pena. So it's going to be very interesting to see if Kayla Harrison can make 135. And Holly Holm's a former champion, been around forever, has good boxing. I know she's become kind of boring over the last, so many years, just clinching up. And I know she's coming off a loss against Mayra Bueno Silva that was overturned to a no contest. But this is still a very interesting fight for the women's bantamweight division. And you have someone who got a lot of notoriety outside the UFC finally making their UFC debut, and we get to see what Kayla Harrison might look like at 135 pounds. So I think that's a solid fight for the prelims. Moving up on this card is so good. Also on the prelims, we have Deiveson Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt. I mean, I would have never, and a lot of these there's a lot of these matchups on this card that I would have loved to switch around and made better matchups, but this is still a great fight. Would I have loved to seen Figgy versus Jan? Yes, I would have loved to seen Figgy versus Jan and Garbrandt versus Cruz too. But at the end of the day, Figgy versus Garbrandt is still a very intriguing fight. The UFC at one point in time was looking to build Cody Garbrandt in this big star after he won the bantamweight title, and they thought they were going to propel him into stardom in the UFC, and then next thing you know, he's just getting his chin taken by TJ Dillashaw. And I thought he was done for a while. I mean, he was just getting KO'd over and over and over again. His chin was gone. But now he's built a little bit of that confidence back. He's coming off a couple wins. I know that it isn't against the best level of competition. He's been outside the top 15 for a bit. And you have Deiveson Figueiredo, who just came up against Rob Font, got a solid win in the bantamweight division, former flyweight champion. Now you got former flyweight champion versus former bantamweight champion. They were supposed to fight at flyweight back in 2020. Got canceled because Cody Garbrandt got sick. And I think this is a really fun matchup. Figgy looked unbelievable against Rob Font in his bantamweight debut. And Cody Garbrandt's been looking decent in his last few fights against lower level competition. I feel like with the chin issues, he needed to kind of get his confidence back. I feel like he has his confidence back. And even though, again, I would have loved some other matchups, I think Deiveson Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt on the prelims on the I mean, we really have to put it in context. We have to put it in the perspective of this is on the prelims. This is a great fight. I mean, fan-friendly matchup. Someone's almost definitely getting finished. Cody Garbrandt, super fast hands, nasty power. Deiveson Figueiredo just overwhelmingly, well-rounded. I mean, there's really no holes in Deiveson Figueiredo's game. Maybe a little bit of his wrestling, but Cody Garbrandt isn't known for going out there and just taking guys down. So this is going to be a striking matchup. There's going to be a great leg kick battle in this fight as well. And it's two former champions. And if Cody Garbrandt wins, don't be shocked if next thing you know, Sean O'Malley, if he beats Marlon Chito Vera at UFC 299, he might be calling out Cody Garbrandt. So this has title implications on the line as well a bit. And if Figgy wins, he's right up there in title discussions. So Deiveson Figueiredo versus Cody Garbrandt is an absolute amazing matchup that I'm really looking forward to in the bantamweight division. Moving up on the card, I believe this may be headlining the prelims again. We have to wait and see what other fights are going to be announced. But that is Calvin Kattar versus Aljamain Sterling in the featherweight division. Former champion Aljamain Sterling moving up from bantamweight to featherweight. He's taking on Calvin Kattar. This is a matchup that, is going to be like, how good is Calvin Kattar's grappling? We know how good Aljamain Sterling is once he gets you down, but Aljamain Sterling doesn't have the best entries. That's what cost him a title fight against Sean O'Malley. So this is going to be a really good test to see if Aljamain Sterling can even hang in the featherweight division. I have my doubts about that, but I love that Aljamain Sterling is just getting thrown right in the mix. And this is, if you look at the featherweight division, this is one of the more winnable matchups in the featherweight division for Aljamain Sterling. I know this is kind of a wild card. I would have loved to see Aljamain Sterling versus Diego Lopes. I know that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But you look at the division, you look at Max Holloway, Yair Rodriguez, Ilia Topuria, Brian Ortega, Movsar Evloev, Arnold Allen, Josh Emmett. Then you get to Calvin Kattar. The most winnable matchup for Aljo in the featherweight division is Calvin Kattar right now, especially, when you get into that like top 8 of the rankings. And I do think it's a fun fight. I do think Calvin Kattar obviously has a massive striking advantage. I do wonder how Sterling puts on size at featherweight. And if Aljamain Sterling wins, he's right in the title picture. If he gets let's say he goes out there and just takes Calvin Kattar down and rear naked chokes him, similar to what he did to Corey Sandhagen back in like 2020, he's right there in the title picture. So then we got Aljamain Sterling now in the mix with Volkanovski, Topuria, Movsar. That makes the featherweight division interesting, and this is going to be a really good test to see how good Sterling can do in the featherweight division. And also for Kattar, he's coming back from an injury. It's going to be very interesting to see how he looks coming off that injury and how does he do against a guy like Aljamain Sterling who has excellent jiu-jitsu. We really haven't seen that style matchup for Calvin Kattar, at least not in a long while. So another excellent fight in the division, and you have the division playing out at UFC 298. So we're going to see if Volkanovski stays the champ. The division's wide open for some fresh faces like Movsar Evloev, like Aljamain Sterling, like Calvin Kattar, who's never fought Volkanovski. The division kind of becomes wide open. So in a way, a lot of these fights where you wouldn't necessarily think of it like right off the top of your head, a lot of them have some title implications. So I think Calvin Kattar versus Aljamain Sterling. Would I love some other matchups? Yes, but this is still a really solid featherweight fight. Now moving on to what I believe will be the main card. And they may add 2 fights to the main card, so one of these fights may get bumped down. Next fight, we have Jiří Procházka versus Aleksandar Rakić. I mean, that's opening up a pay-per-view main card. For everybody complaining about UFC 300, how can you complain about a card that has Jiří Procházka versus Aleksandar Rakić opening up the pay-per-view main card? It may be headlining the prelims. If they add 2 more title fights to UFC 300's main card, main event, co-main event, which they may not, I mean, that's going to be opening up the main card. That's straight up insanity. Jiří Procházka is hands down one of the most exciting fighters on the roster. He's coming off a loss against Alex Pereira, and I know he got finished in that loss. I know he got KO'd in that loss. But he was doing very well in that fight. He was landing some good shots. He had some good grappling. He was coming back from an injury. He lost. He got clipped. He got hurt. He got elbowed, and he got finished. But Jiří Procházka is still top of the food chain in the light heavyweight division. I mean, where's his current ranking? His current ranking is number 2 in the division. Aleksandar Rakić is number 5. Aleksandar Rakić was kind of on the cusp of a title shot himself when he got injured against Jan Blachowicz in a fight that the momentum was starting to go in his direction. I believe Aleksandar Rakić would have beaten Jan Blachowicz. So this is a fight that, I mean, this definitely has title implications in the division. I know the division is a little bit log jam. You got Magomed Ankalaev, Jamal Hill, kind of all vying for that Alex Pereira title shot in their next fight. Depending on the health of Jamal Hill, he probably is most likely next. But if he's not healthy, it's going to be Magomed Ankalaev. Right after that kind of cluster, you have the winner of Jiří Procházka versus Aleksandar Rakić. Aleksandar Rakić is super well-rounded, great grappling, great striking, good power, and he's a massive light heavyweight. And then you have Jiří, who is an absolute savage, an absolute madman, loves to rush forward, throw wild winging shots, is well-rounded as well, has some decent grappling, has shown decent grappling in the past as well. Look what he did against Glover Teixeira. Nobody thought he had a chance against Glover Teixeira on the ground, and look at him. I mean, at one point, he's full mounted in the 5th round. He goes from being full mounted to locking in a rear naked choke with no hooks in the span of 20 seconds, just because he presses off the cage, and I don't even remember the exact transition, ends up on top. I mean, Jiří Procházka versus Glover Teixeira is one of the greatest title fights of all time. And Jiří Procházka, every single fight he's been in, he's not been in a single boring fight yet in his entire UFC career, which is relatively young, but he's taken on a guy in Alexander Rakić who is the complete package, and it's going to be a tough fight for Jiří. I initially kind of crapped on this matchup a little bit, but it was just because of my bias of kind of wanting Jiří to get back on the winning track a little bit. This is an amazing fight. I mean, both guys top ranked in the light heavyweight division, on the cusp of title shots. I love this matchup, and it's gonna indicate who is kind of maybe in a number one contender fight after this that will fight in a number one contender fight, or they may just sit out depending on how the division plays out with Jamal Hill and Magomed Ankalaev. They may walk into a title shot. The UFC definitely is going to want Jiří Procházka right back in the title picture. So if he beats Alexander Rakić, it wouldn't surprise me if the UFC tells Jiří, just wait it out a little bit and we'll see if we can slip you in for a title shot. No one would complain about that. Former champion came back from an injury, had a decent showing against Alex Pereira. Who wouldn't want to see Alex Pereira, Jiří Procházka too? I wouldn't mind seeing that. I know it's a little bit premature to start hyping up that fight just yet, but this is a banger fight, and this is opening up the pay-per-view main card. That's why I can't believe so many people are criticizing this card. And again, I've been one to criticize some of these fights on this card because I like to talk about every fight from all different angles. But I just feel like UFC 300 has been so overwhelmingly negative. And I know I get criticized for being overwhelmingly negative, even though that's not true. It's just I don't, kind of brown nose for the UFC or shill for the UFC. When I have a complaint, I make it known. And I like to think of things from all angles. But this card is one of the greatest cards the UFC has ever built, and they're not done just yet. There's still multiple fights to be added to the card. And Jiří Procházka, Alexander Rakić is an incredible fight. Moving up on the main card, we have Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. This is my favorite fight on the card. I mean, this is undoubtedly for a lightweight number one contender or lightweight title shot after this. They're both coming off the utter destruction of Beneil Dariush. And they're both so fun to watch. I mean, Charles Oliveira, when has he ever been in a boring fight ever? I don't remember Charles Oliveira ever being in a boring fight. He's such a finisher, amazing grappling, great striking, still getting better, former champion. And then you have Arman Tsarukyan, who has kind of been looking for his big opportunity. He finally gets kind of a top-ranked guy in Beneil Dariush and goes out there and dispatches him in the first round brutally, doesn't even get touched at all. And now he's fighting Charles Oliveira. I love this fight. This could be a title fight in another universe. In an alternate reality, we're getting Charles Oliveira defending his lightweight title against Arman Tsarukyan. And the winner of this fight is definitely fighting Islam Makhachev. Maybe not necessarily next, depending on when Islam defends his title. But the winner of this fight is most likely going to sit out and then maybe fight Islam Makhachev at the tail end of the year, maybe October, November, somewhere around there. They're going to fight Islam Makhachev if Islam still has the belt, but they're going to fight for the lightweight champion later in 2024. I don't know how anyone could have any complaint about Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. I am so looking forward to this matchup. Both are still relatively young. I know Oliveira is, he feels older than he actually is, but he's only 34 years old. And, I get it, towards the mid-30s is when guys seem to start decline. But Oliveira's been around forever. 34 wins. Of those 34 wins, this is crazy, 31 finishes. 31 finishes for Charles Oliveira. And then you have Arman Tsarukyan, who isn't as much of a finisher, but 21 wins. Of those 21 wins, he has 14 via finish. And he's coming off a winner over Beneil Dariush. He's coming off a winner of Joaquim Silva, where people acted like he was a fraud because he got clipped and then inevitably got the finish anyway. Coming off a domination of Damir Ismagulov. And then the only loss he has in recent memory is Mateusz Gamrot, and I thought he won that fight. I thought it was a bad scorecard. So his only real loss in the UFC is short notice against Islam Makhachev, the current champion. Who doesn't want to see that rematch? Who doesn't want to see Islam Makhachev versus Arman Tsarukyan on a full camp for Arman Tsarukyan? I absolutely want to see that fight. This could literally headline a pay-per-view. Let's say all the fights were still the same. I don't know how it would play out because there wouldn't be enough fights for early prelims. But let's say they got rid of the early prelims, and they just had prelims and then the main card, and this was the main event. I'd buy this pay-per-view already. I'd already buy this pay-per-view. Obviously, you'd have to shift some things around. but we still aren't even done yet. We still have 2 more announced fights, and we still don't even have all the fights announced. So Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan, undoubtedly my favorite fight on the card. Comment down below and let me know what is your current favorite fight on UFC 300. But for me, I am just dying to see Charles Oliveira versus Arman Tsarukyan. That is an incredible matchup that I'm really looking forward to. And they're both top ranked in the lightweight division. I mean, right now, you look at the lightweight division, Charles Oliveira is number 1, Arman Tsarukyan is number 4. So, I mean, the what we have on the line in that fight is a massive for the division, and it's one of the most highly skilled matchups you could ever imagine. Moving up on the card, which is presumed the featured fight on the card, but again, we do not know yet. Based on the bout order the UFC showed in the War Room, but also the graphic they released, we have Weili Zhang versus Xiaonan for the women's strawweight title. This is a banger fight. Both are super exciting. I understand that Weili Zhang definitely has a grappling advantage over Xiaonan, and maybe she goes out there and just out-grapples her and finishes her. This is still a super amazing title fight. I know people it's kind of, popular nowadays to hate on women's MMA. And I'm with you guys hating on low-level MMA in general. I don't care if it's women's or men's MMA. Low-level women's MMA is terrible. Low-level men's MMA is terrible. But we've just been more conditioned to accept the low-level men's, and we kind of hate it more when it's low-level women's. This is not low-level at all. I mean, this is top tier. Weili Zhang is arguably the best women's fighter in the UFC right now. You could make that argument. And, I mean, Weili Zhang literally has one of the best fights in UFC history against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. And I understand that was many years ago. But Weili Zhang is providing exciting fight after exciting fight after exciting fight. Even her last fight against Amanda Lemos was relatively exciting. The fight against Carla Esparza, went out there, crucifixed her, beat the crap out of her. The fight before that against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, the rematch. That fight was amazing. I mean, that spinning backfish finish was nasty. Even the loss, the split decision against Rose Namajunas was a credible performance. I even thought she could have edged that fight out. Fight before that, she lost against Rose, got head kicked in the first round. But, I mean, that didn't even last that long, so you can't even really say that much. Weili Zhang is never in a boring fight, and Xiaonan has looked incredible. I mean, she's been getting better and better and better over the last few years, and I get it. She's at a grappling disadvantage, but she's coming off a stoppage win over Jessica Andrade. She's coming off a win over Mackenzie Dern. She has a split decision loss to Marina Rodriguez, and she got out-grappled by Carla Esparza, but that was 3 years ago at this point. She's worked on her grappling. I think it's improved, and I think Weili Zhang has been fighting top-flight competition for a while, and when you see these kind of dominant champs, even though I know Weili Zhang's kind of dropped the belt, won the belt, whatnot, but when you see them competing at the top of the game for so long, eventually they're going to have a fall-off, and I think this is a super exciting matchup. It's for the title, and I think it will end up being a very fun fight. So as much as people are complaining about it, for the featured fight on the card, potentially maybe not even the featured fight on the card, it might be even further down depending on what they announce, for the rest of the card. That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. I'm looking forward to Weili Zhang versus Xiaonan. Now, moving up on the card, this may be the co-main, this may be the featured fight on the card, and that is Justin Gaethje versus Max Holloway for the BMF title. Now, again, I don't want to harp too much on complaints in this video because, again, I feel like everyone's already been super negative about 300. I hate the BMF title. I'll get that out of the way. I just have to say that as a disclaimer. I don't like the BMF title. It's gimmicky. It's WWE. But when you look at Justin Gaethje, he's one of the most exciting fighters on the roster all time. I mean, honestly, I've said this multiple times. I don't know how anyone's complaining about UFC 300 when if you think of like top 5 most exciting fighters right now, almost definitely on the list is Justin Gaethje. Almost definitely on the list is Charles Oliveira. And almost definitely on the list is Jiří Procházka. And all 3 of those guys are on UFC 300. So Justin Gaethje, one of the most exciting fighters in the UFC right now, if not the most exciting fighter in the UFC, always has been exciting. I've been following his career since he was beating up Nick Newell over at World Series of Fighting, now known as PFL. And Justin Gaethje, I mean, he's so exciting. And he's fighting Max Holloway, who also is up there. I wouldn't say he's top 5, but maybe top 10, top 15 most exciting fighters. Max Holloway's always in exciting fights. He's a volume-style striker who has amazing cardio. Now, I don't absolutely love him moving up to lightweight, but at the end of the day, even though there's better matchups that I would have preferred to see, Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway is a fan-friendly matchup for a kind of weird BMF title where it's already, it's already kind of agreed upon that they're going to go out there and just strike. Nobody's really going to grapple in this fight. We're going to see the leg kicks of Justin Gaethje versus the volume and stamina of Max Holloway. And I just, even though I kind of dislike this fight because I just don't think it's super competitive, I think Max Holloway is just going to be too small. If he was taking 6 months, a year to really go up to lightweight, I think it'd be much better chances for Max Holloway. But at the end of the day, it's MMA. We don't truly know. And for this to potentially be co-main event, maybe featured fight on the card, and we have Justin Gaethje, Max Holloway, that's a lot of name value, and they have two very exciting fight styles. If they were exactly the same size, if Gaethje was fighting at featherweight, I couldn't welcome this matchup anymore. The only thing I don't like is the weight discrepancy, but this is a really compelling fight. And again, we still don't even have the rest of the fights. We're getting at least 2, maybe 3 more fights for this card, including the main event. So this is co-main, which is kind of weird because they're putting it over Weili, Zhang, and Xiaonan, but I understand why they're doing that for promotional purposes. And I don't necessarily hate it at all. I mean, I understand, but I just don't like the whole incorporation of the BMF title. I guess they're going to call it Justin Gaethje defending BMF champion, which really kind of puts me off. But again, we're not going to get into that. That's a topic for another video. But how can we sit here complain when we have, think about how many fights I just went through. When have we ever been at least mildly excited for every single fight on a card? And there's a potential we get a co-main of Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad. And then a main event, which, maybe the middleweight division, maybe the light heavyweight division. I'll give my guess in a minute. But I just feel like the overwhelming negativity for UFC 300 is unwarranted because I feel like a lot of people who are just saying 300 is completely ruined, 300's terrible, they just haven't been a fan for long enough. They don't understand that UFC 200 was hyped up just as much as UFC 300, and 300 literally takes a massive steaming dump right on the head of UFC 300, or right on the head of UFC 200. 300 is leaps and bounds better than 200. Main event was Amanda Nunes versus Miesha Tate for the bantamweight title, and I know there was a John Jones DC fight that got canceled, but you look at the rest of the card, Brock Lesnar, Mark Hunt, who gives a shit about that fight? Only casuals. Then you had Daniel Cormier versus Anderson Silva, which was a short notice fight thrown together. Then you have Jose Aldo versus Frankie Edgar for the featherweight belt, which is a solid fight, don't get me wrong. Then on the opening up the main card, you had Cain Velasquez, Travis Brown, which was like a kind of a top-ranked heavyweight matchup at the time. Then on the prelims, Juliana Pena, Kat Zingano. Really didn't mean all that much, a little bit. Then you had Kelvin Gastelum, Johnny Hendricks, TJ Dillashaw, Rafael Sunsal, Sage Northcutt versus Enrique Marin. I don't even know how you pronounce his last name. Then you had Joe Lozon versus Diego Sanchez, Gegard Mousasi, Thiago Santos, Jim Miller versus Takanori Gomi. So the card was good, but 300 is leaps and bounds better than 200. 300 is leaps and bounds better than 100 as it sits right now, and we don't even have the full card. So I wanted to make a video really singing high praise of UFC 300 because even though it's not, every fight is just the most banger fight you could ever imagine, it still has relevant fights of high skill level fighters where they're having fights that are relevant to the division, has title implications, has contender implications, and they're meaningful. Each and every fight is meaningful. So I have to sit here and defend the UFC and Dana White. Now, before I end this video, I want to try to guess the main event. And I've already made a video about this, so if you've watched that video, you already know what my pick is. I believe the main event will be Dricus du Plessis versus Israel Adesanya for the middleweight title. Maybe that gets announced tonight. Maybe that gets announced tomorrow. I'm not 100% sure yet. But the other options, I feel like a lot of people are saying, we want Conor McGregor. I don't want Conor McGregor versus anyone on UFC 300, to be quite honest. Conor McGregor's been out for 3 years, coming back from a catastrophic injuries. Only, that leg break was nasty. Only casuals really want Conor McGregor to headline the card. I don't want that. I mean, if that's the only option, sure, I'll take that. But you basically have, Dricus du Plessis versus either Adesanya or Hamza. I believe it will be Adesanya. You basically have a light heavyweight title defense, Alex Pereira versus either Jamal Hill or Magomed Ankalaev, or basically some wild card out of nowhere. I mean, you could do like an Adesanya versus Chimaev interim middleweight title, because I don't believe they would just do that for no title. You could have something along those lines, or you could have Leon Edwards versus Bilal Muhammad too, which I don't think they're going to do as the main event. That may be snuck in there as a co-main event. We'll have to wait and see what Dana White announces. But I truly do believe it will be Israel Adesanya getting a title shot against new champion Dricus du Plessis. If it was up to me right now, I would book Dricus versus Adesanya as the main event. Co-main event, Sean Strickland versus Khamzat Chimaev. And I know that's not what the masses necessarily want, but I think that would really solidify UFC 300 as the greatest fight card on paper of all time. I'm super hyped for 300. What I'm not looking forward to is some of these Apex events that are going to be kind of put together around this and before it, because we're kind of taking a lot of talent that could be on those cards. So I'm not looking forward to what UFC 300 is going to do to the rest of the landscape. But the people acting like 300's horrible, they're acting like it's ruined, are being way over dramatic. UFC 300 is a really top quality card, and I can't wait to find out what the main event will be. And as soon as that's announced, I will make a reaction video to that. So make sure you subscribe to the channel, make sure you turn on notifications. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.